The Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie, Part 3:15. A photograph. The doctor's words were so surprising that we were all momentarily taken aback. Here was a man stabbed with a dagger which we knew to have been stolen only 24 hours previously, and yet Dr. Durand asserted positively that he had been dead at least 48 hours. The whole thing was fantastic to the last extreme. We were still recovering from the surprise of the doctor's announcement when a telegram was brought to me. It had been sent up from the hotel to the villa. I tore it open. It was from Poirot, and announced his return by the train arriving at Merlinville at 10:28. I looked at my watch and saw that I had just time to get comfortably to the station and meet him there. I felt that it was of the utmost importance that he should know at once of the new and startling developments in the case. Evidently, I reflected, Poirot had had no difficulty in finding what he wanted in Paris. The quickness of his return proved that. Very few hours had sufficed. I wondered how he would take the exciting news I had to impart. The train was some minutes late, and I strolled aimlessly up and down the platform, until it occurred to me that I might pass the time by asking a few questions as to who had left Merlinville by the last train on the evening of the tragedy. I approached the chief porter, an intelligent-looking man, and had little difficulty in persuading him to enter upon the subject. It was a disgrace to the police, he hotly affirmed, that such brigands of assassins should be allowed to go about unpunished. I hinted that there was some possibility they might have left by the midnight train, but he negatived the idea decidedly. He would have noticed 2 foreigners. He was sure of it. Only about 20 people had left by the train, and he could not have failed to observe them. I do not know what put the idea into my head. Possibly it was the deep anxiety underlying Marthe d'Aubreul's tones, but I asked suddenly, "Young M. Reynolds, he did not leave by that train, did he?"
No.
Monsieur, to arrive and start off again within half an hour, it would not be amusing, that. I stared at the man, the significance of his words almost escaping me. Then I saw.
Hi?
You mean? I said, my heart beating a little. Them Jack Reynolds arrived at Merlinville that evening. But yes, monsieur, by the last train arriving the other way, the 11:40. My brain whirled. That, then, was the reason of Marthy's poignant anxiety. Jack Reynolds had been in Merlinville on the night of the crime. But why had he not said so? Why, on the contrary, had he led us to believe that he had remained in Cherbourg? Remembering his frank boyish countenance, I could hardly bring myself to believe that he had any connection with the crime. Yet why this silence on his part about so vital a matter? One thing was certain. Marthe had known all along. Hence her anxiety and her eager questioning of Poirot to know whether anyone were suspected. My cogitations were interrupted by the arrival of the train, and in another moment I was greeting Poirot. The little man was radiant. He beamed and vociferated, and, forgetting my English reluctance, embraced me warmly on the platform. Mon cher ami, I have succeeded, but succeeded to a marvel. Indeed, I'm delighted to hear it. Have you heard the latest here? How would you that I should hear anything? There have been some developments, eh? The brave Giraud, he has made an arrest, or even arrests perhaps. But I will make him look foolish, that one. But where are you taking me, my friend? Do we not go to the hotel? It is necessary that I attend to my moustaches. They are deplorably limp from the heat of travelling. Also, without doubt, there is dust on my coat, and my tie that I must rearrange. I cut short his remonstrances. My dear Poirot, never mind all that. We must go to the villa at once. There has been another murder. I have frequently been disappointed when fancying that I was giving news of importance to my friend. Either he has known it already, or he has dismissed it as irrelevant to the main issue. And in the latter case events have usually proved him justified. But this time I could not complain of missing my effect. Never have I seen a man so flabbergasted. His jaw dropped. All the jauntiness went out of his bearing. He stared at me open-mouthed. What is that you say? Another murder? Ah, then I am all wrong. I have failed. Gerard may mock himself at me. He will have reason. You did not expect it, then? Aye, not the least in the world. It demolishes my theory. It ruins everything. Ah, no. He stopped dead, thumping himself on the chest. It is impossible. I cannot be wrong. The facts, taken methodically and in their proper order, admit of only one explanation. I must be right. I am right. But then, he interrupted me. Wait, my friend. I must be right. Therefore this new murder is impossible unless... Unless... Oh, wait, I implore you. Say no word. He was silent for a moment or two. Then, resuming his normal manner, he said in a quiet, assured voice, The victim is a man of middle age. His body was found in the locked shed near the scene of the crime, and had been dead at least 48 hours. And it is most probable that he was stabbed in a similar manner to Reynolds, though not necessarily in the back. It was my turn to gape, and gape I did. In all my knowledge of Poirot, he had never done anything so amazing as this, and almost inevitably a doubt crossed my mind. Poirot, I cried, you're pulling my leg. You've heard all about it already. He turned his earnest gaze upon me reproachfully. Would I do such a thing? I assure you that I have heard nothing whatsoever. Did you not observe the shock your news was to me? But how on earth could you know all that? I was right then. But I knew it. The little grey cells, my friend, the little grey cells. They told me. Thus, and in no other way, could there have been a second death. Now tell me all. If we go round to the left here, we can take a short cut across the golf links, which will bring us to the back of the Villa Genevieve much more quickly. As we walked, taking the way he had indicated, I recounted all I knew. Poirot listened attentively. The dagger was in the wound, you say? That is curious. You are sure it was the same one? Absolutely certain. That's what makes it so impossible. Nothing is impossible. There may have been two daggers. I raised my eyebrows. Surely that is in the highest degree unlikely. It would be a most extraordinary coincidence. You speak as usual, without reflection, Hastings. In some cases, two identical weapons would be highly improbable. But not here. This particular weapon was a war souvenir which was made to Jack Reynolds' orders. It is really highly unlikely, when you come to think of it, that he should have had only one made. Very probably he would have another for his own use. But nobody has mentioned such a thing, I objected. A hint of the lecturer crept into Poirot's tone. My friend, in working upon a case, one does not take into account only the things that are mentioned. There is no reason to mention many things which may be important. Equally, there is often an excellent reason for not mentioning them. You can take your choice of the two motives. I was silent, impressed in spite of myself. Another few minutes brought us to the famous shed. We found all our friends there, and after an interchange of polite amenities, Poirot began his task. Having watched Gerard at work, I was keenly interested. Poirot bestowed but a cursory glance on the surroundings. The only thing he examined was the ragged coat and trousers by the door. A disdainful smile rose to Gerard's lips, and as though noting it, Poirot flung the bundle down again. Old clothes of the gardener's, he queried. Exactly, said Gerard. Poirot knelt down by the body. His fingers were rapid but methodical. He examined the texture of the clothes, and satisfied himself that there were no marks on them. The boots he subjected to special care, also the dirty and broken finger-nails. Whilst examining the latter, he threw a quick question at Gerard. You saw these? Yes, I saw them, replied the other. His face remained inscrutable. Suddenly Poirot stiffened. Dut. Duess! The doctor came forward. There is foam on the lips. You observed it. I didn't notice it, I must admit. But you observe it now. Oh, certainly. Poirot again shot a question at Gerard. You noticed it without doubt. The other did not reply. Poirot proceeded. The dagger had been withdrawn from the wound. It reposed in a glass jar by the side of the body. Poirot examined it, then he studied the wound closely. When he looked up, his eyes were excited, and shone with the green light I knew so well. "It is a strange wound. This!" "It has not bled. There is no stain on the clothes. The blade of the dagger is slightly discoloured. That is all. What do you think, Le Doctor? I can only say that it is most abnormal." "It is not abnormal at all. It is most simple. The man was stabbed after he was dead, and, stilling the clamour of voices that arose with a wave of his hand, Poirot turned to Giraud and added, Giraud agrees with me, do you not?" "Monsieur." Whatever Giraud's real belief, he accepted the position without moving a muscle. Calmly and almost scornfully he replied, "Certainly I agree." The murmur of surprise and interest broke out again. "But what an idea!" cried Hortet. "To stab a man after he is dead, barbaric unheard of, some unappeasable hate, perhaps." "No, Emily Juge," said Poirot. "I should fancy it was done quite cold-bloodedly, to create an impression. What impression?" "The impression it nearly did create," returned Poirot oracularly. Bex had been thinking. "How, then? Was the man killed?" "He was not killed. He died. He died, Emily Juge, if I am not much mistaken, of an epileptic fit." This statement of Poirot's again aroused considerable excitement. Dr. Durand knelt down again, and made a searching examination. At last he rose to his feet. "Well, Doctor, Poirot, I am inclined to believe that you are correct in your assertion. I was misled to begin with. The incontrovertible fact that the man had been stabbed distracted my attention from any other indications. Poirot was the hero of the hour. The examining magistrate was profuse in compliments. Poirot responded gracefully, and then excused himself on the pretext that neither he nor I had yet lunched, and that he wished to repair the ravages of the journey. As we were about to leave the shed, Giraud approached us. "One more thing, Poirot," he said in his suave, mocking voice. "We found this coiled round the handle of the dagger." "A woman's hair," said Poirot. "A woman's hair. What woman's? I wonder." "I wonder also," said Giraud. Then, with a bow, he left us. "He was insistent, the good Giraud," said Poirot thoughtfully, as we walked towards the hotel. "I wonder in what direction he hopes to mislead me. A woman's hair." We lunched heartily, but I found Poirot somewhat distrait and inattentive. Afterwards we went up to our sitting-room, and there I begged him to tell me something of his mysterious journey to Paris. "Willingly, my friend." I went to Paris to find this. He took from his pocket a small faded newspaper cutting. It was the reproduction of a woman's photograph. He handed it to me. I uttered an exclamation. "You recognize it, my friend?" I nodded. Although the photo obviously dated from very many years back, and the hair was dressed in a different style, the likeness was unmistakable. "Madame d'Aubreuil?" I exclaimed. Poirot shook his head with a smile. "Not quite correct, my friend. She did not call herself by that name in those days. That is a picture of the notorious Madame Bereldy." Madame Bereldy. In a flash the whole thing came back to me. The murder trial that had evoked such world-wide interest. The Bereldy case, 16. The Bereldy case. Some 20 years or so before the opening of the present story, Monsieur Arnold Bereldy, a native of Lyons, arrived in Paris accompanied by his pretty wife Anne and their little daughter, a mere babe. Monsieur Bereldy was a junior partner in a firm of wine merchants, a stout middle-aged man, fond of the good things of life, devoted to his charming wife, and altogether unremarkable in every way. The firm in which Monsieur Bereldy was a partner was a small one, and although doing well, it did not yield a large income to the junior partner. The Bereldys had a small apartment and lived in a very modest fashion to begin with. But unremarkable though Monsieur Bereldy might be, his wife was plentifully gilded with the brush of romance. Young and good-looking, and gifted withal with a singular charm of manner, Madame Bereldy at once created a stir in the quarter, especially when it began to be whispered that some interesting mystery surrounded her birth. It was rumoured that she was the illegitimate daughter of a Russian Grand Duke. Others asserted that it was an Austrian Archduke, and that the union was legal, though morganatic. But all stories agreed upon one point, that Jean Beroldy was the centre of an interesting mystery. Questioned by the curious, Madame Beroldy did not deny these rumours. On the other hand, she let it be clearly understood that, though her lips were sealed, all these stories had a foundation in fact. To intimate friends she unburdened herself further, spoke of political intrigues, of papers, of obscure dangers that threatened her. There was also much talk of crown jewels that were to be sold secretly, with herself acting as the go-between. Amongst the friends and acquaintances of the Beroldys was a young lawyer, Georges Canoe. It was soon evident that the fascinating Jean had completely enslaved his heart. Madame Beroldy encouraged the young man in a discreet fashion, but being always careful to affirm her complete devotion to her middle-aged husband. Nevertheless, many spiteful persons did not hesitate to declare that young Canoe was her lover, and not the only one. When the Beroldys had been in Paris about 3 months, another personage came upon the scene. This was Mr. Hiram P. Trapp, a native of the United States, and extremely wealthy. Introduced to the charming and mysterious Madame Beroldy, he fell a prompt victim to her fascinations. His admiration was obvious, though strictly respectful. About this time, Madame Beroldy became more outspoken in her confidences. To several friends, she declared herself greatly worried on her husband's behalf. She explained that he had been drawn into several schemes of a political nature, and also referred to some important papers that had been entrusted to him for safekeeping, and which concerned a secret of far-reaching European importance. They had been entrusted to his custody to throw pursuers off the track, but Madame Beroldy was nervous, having recognized several important members of the revolutionary circle in Paris. On the 28th day of November, the blow fell. The woman who came daily to clean and cook for the Beroldys was surprised to find the door of the apartment standing wide open. Hearing faint moans issuing from the bedroom, she went in. A terrible sight met her eyes. Madame Beroldy lay on the floor, bound hand and foot, uttering feeble moans, having managed to free her mouth from a gag. On the bed was Monsieur Beroldy, lying in a pool of blood, with a knife driven through his heart. Madame Beroldy's story was clear enough. Suddenly awakened from sleep, she had discerned 2 masked men bending over her. Stifling her cries, they had bound and gagged her. They had then demanded of Monsieur Beroldy the famous secret, but the intrepid wine merchant refused point-blank to accede to their request. Angered by his refusal, one of the men incontinently stabbed him through the heart. With the dead man's keys, they had opened the safe in the corner, and had carried away with them a mass of papers. Both men were heavily bearded, and had worn masks, but Madame Beroldy declared positively that they were Russians. The affair created an immense sensation. It was referred to variously as the Nihilist atrocity, revolutionaries in Paris, and the Russian mystery. Time went on, and the mysterious bearded men were never traced. And then, just as public interest was beginning to die down, a startling development occurred. Madame Beroldy was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband. The trial, when it came on, aroused widespread interest. The youth and beauty of the accused, and her mysterious history, were sufficient to make of it a cause célèbre. People ranged themselves wildly for or against the prisoner, but her partisans received several severe checks to their enthusiasm. The romantic past of Madame Beroldy, her royal blood, and the mysterious intrigues in which she had her being were shown to be mere fantasies of the imagination. It was proved beyond doubt that Jean Beroldy's parents were a highly respectable and prosaic couple, fruit merchants who lived on the outskirts of Lyons. The Russian Grand Duke, the court intrigues, and the political schemes. All the stories current were traced back to the lady herself. From her brain had emanated these ingenious myths, and she was proved to have raised a considerable sum of money from various credulous persons by her fiction of the crown jewels, the jewels in question being found to be mere paste imitations. Remorselessly the whole story of her life was laid bare. The motive for the murder was found in Mr. Hiram P. Trapp. Mr. Trapp did his best, but relentlessly and agilely cross-questioned, he was forced to admit that he loved the lady, and that, had she been free, he would have asked her to be his wife. The fact that the relations between them were admittedly platonic strengthened the case against the accused. Debarred from becoming his mistress by the simple honourable nature of the man, Jane Berreldy had conceived the monstrous project of ridding herself of her elderly, undistinguished husband, and becoming the wife of the rich American. Throughout, Madame Berreldy confronted her accusers with complete sang-froid and self-possession. Her story never varied. She continued to declare strenuously that she was of royal birth, and that she had been substituted for the daughter of the fruit seller at an early age. Absurd and completely unsubstantiated as these statements were, a great number of people believed implicitly in their truth, but the prosecution was implacable. It denounced the masked Russians as a myth and asserted that the crime had been committed by Madame Berreldy and her lover, Georges Connew. A warrant was issued for the arrest of the latter, but he had wisely disappeared. Evidence showed that the bonds which secured Madame Berreldy were so loose that she could easily have freed herself. And then, towards the close of the trial, a letter, posted in Paris, was sent to the public prosecutor. It was from Georges Connew, and, without revealing his whereabouts, it contained a full confession of the crime. He declared that he had indeed struck the fatal blow at Madame Berreldy's instigation. The crime had been planned between them. Believing that her husband ill-treated her, and maddened by his own passion for her, a passion which he believed her to return, he had planned the crime and struck the fatal blow that should free the woman he loved from a hateful bondage. Now, for the first time, he learnt of Mr. Hiram P. Trapp, and realized that the woman he loved had betrayed him. Not for his sake did she wish to be free, but in order to marry the wealthy American. She had used him as a cat's paw, and now, in his jealous rage, he turned and denounced her, declaring that throughout he had acted at her instigation. And then Madame Berreldy proved herself the remarkable woman she undoubtedly was. Without hesitation, she dropped her previous defence, and admitted that the Russians were a pure invention on her part. The real murderer was Georges Connew. Maddened by passion, he had committed the crime, vowing that if she did not keep silence he would enact a terrible vengeance from her. Terrified by his threats, she had consented, also fearing it likely that if she told the truth she might be accused of conniving at the crime. But she had steadfastly refused to have anything more to do with her husband's murderer, and it was in revenge for this attitude on her part that he had written this letter accusing her. She swore solemnly that she had had nothing to do with the planning of the crime, that she had awoke on that memorable night to find Georges Connew standing over her, the blood-stained knife in his hand. It was a touch-and-go affair. Madame Berreldy's story was hardly credible. But this woman, whose fairy tales of royal intrigues had been so easily accepted, had the supreme art of making herself believed. Her address to the jury was a masterpiece. The tears streaming down her face, she spoke of her child, of her woman's honour, of her desire to keep her reputation untarnished for the child's sake. She admitted that, Georges Connew having been her lover, she might perhaps be held morally responsible for the crime, but before God, nothing more. She knew that she had committed a grave fault in not denouncing Connew to the law, but she declared in a broken voice that that was a thing no woman could have done. 'Cause she had loved him. Could she let her hand be the one to send him to the guillotine? She had been guilty of much, but she was innocent of the terrible crime imputed to her. However that may have been, her eloquence and personality won the day. Madame Berreldy, amidst a scene of unparalleled excitement, was acquitted. Despite the utmost endeavours of the police, George's connu was never traced. As for Madame Bereldy, nothing more was heard of her. Taking the child with her, she left Paris to begin a new life. 17. We make further investigations. I have set down the Bereldy case in full. Of course, all the details did not present themselves to my memory as I have recounted them here. Nevertheless, I recalled the case fairly accurately. It had attracted a great deal of interest at the time, and had been fully reported by the English papers, so that it did not need much effort of memory on my part to recollect the salient details. Just for the moment. In my excitement, it seemed to clear up the whole matter. I admit that I am impulsive, and Poirot deplores my custom of jumping to conclusions, but I think I had some excuse in this instance. The remarkable way in which this discovery justified Poirot's point of view struck me at once. "Poirot," I said, "I congratulate you. I see everything now. If that is indeed the truth, I congratulate you, mon ami, for as a rule you are not famous for seeing. Is it not so?" I felt a little annoyed. "Come now, don't rub it in. You've been so confoundedly mysterious all along with your hints, and your insignificant details, that anyone might fail to see what you were driving at." Poirot lit one of his little cigarettes with his usual precision. Then he looked up. "And since you see everything now, mon ami, what exactly is it that you see?" "Why, that it was Madame d'Aubrieux, Bereldy, who murdered Mr. Reynolds. The similarity of the two cases proves that beyond a doubt. Then you consider that Madame Bereldy was wrongly acquitted, that in actual fact she was guilty of connivance in her husband's murder." I opened my eyes wide. "But of course, don't you?" Poirot walked to the end of the room, absent-mindedly straightened a chair, and then said thoughtfully, "Yes, that is my opinion. But there is no course about it, my friend. Technically speaking, Madame Bereldy is innocent. Of that crime, perhaps, but not of this." Poirot sat down again and regarded me, his thoughtful air more marked than ever. "So it is definitely your opinion, Hastings, that Madame d'Aubrieux murdered M. Renaud West?" He shot the question at me with such suddenness that I was taken aback. "Why?" I stammered. "Why? Oh, because—" I came to a stop. Poirot nodded his head at me. "You see, you come to a stumbling block at once. Why should Madame d'Aubrieux, as I shall call her, that for clearness' sake murder M. Reynolds? We can find no shadow of a motive. She does not benefit by his death. Considered as either mistress or blackmailer, she stands to lose. You cannot have a murder without a motive. The first crime was different. There we had a rich lover waiting to step into her husband's shoes. Money is not the only motive for murder, I objected. True, agreed Poirot placidly. There are two others, the crime passional is one. And there is the third rare motive, murder for an idea which implies some form of mental derangement on the part of the murderer. Homicidal mania and religious fanaticism belong to that class. We can rule it out here. But what about the crime passional? Can you rule that out? If Madame d'Aubrieux was Reynolds' mistress, if she found that his affection was cooling, or if her jealousy was aroused in any way, might she not have struck him down in a moment of anger? Poirot shook his head. I say, if, you note, Madame d'Aubrieux was Reynolds' mistress, he had not had time to tire of her, and in any case you mistake her character. She is a woman who can simulate great emotional stress. She is a magnificent actress. But, looked at dispassionately, her life disproves her appearance. Throughout, if we examine it, she had been cold-blooded and calculating in her motives and actions. It was not to link her life with that of her young lover that she connived at her husband's murder. The rich American, for whom she probably did not care a button, was her objective. If she committed a crime, she would always do so for gain. Here there was no gain. Besides, how do you account for the digging of the grave? That was a man's work. She might have had an accomplice, I suggested. Unwilling to relinquish my belief, I passed to another objection. You have spoken of the similarity between the two crimes. Wherein does that lie, my friend? I stared at him in astonishment. Why, Poirot, it was you who remarked on that. The story of the masked men, the secret, the papers. Poirot smiled a little. Do not be so indignant, I beg of you. I repudiate nothing. The similarity of the two stories links the two cases together inevitably. But reflect now on something very curious. It is not Madame d'Aubreuil who tells us this tale. If it were all, would indeed be plain sailing. It is Madame Renaud. Is she then in league with the other? I can't believe that, I said slowly. If it is so, she must be the most consummate actress the world has ever known. Tete-a-tete, said Poirot impatiently. Again you have the sentiment, and not the logic. If it is necessary for a criminal to be a consummate actress, then by all means assume her to be one. But is it necessary? I do not believe Madame Renaud to be in league with Madame d'Aubreuil for several reasons, some of which I have already enumerated to you. The others are self-evident. Therefore, that possibility eliminated, we draw very near to the truth, which is, as always, very curious and interesting. Poirot, I cried, what more do you know? Mon ami, you must make your own deductions. You have access to the facts. Concentrate your grey cells. Reason, not like Giraud, but like Hercule Poirot. But are you sure? My friend, in many ways I have been an imbecile. But at last I see clearly. You know everything. I have discovered what Renaud sent for me to discover. And you know the murderer. I know one murderer. What do you mean? We talk a little at cross purposes. There are here not one crime, but two. The first I have solved, the second a bin. I will confess I am not sure. But, Poirot, I thought you said the man in the shed had died a natural death. Tete-a-tete. Poirot made his favourite ejaculation of impatience. Still you do not understand. One may have a crime without a murderer, but for two crimes it is essential to have two bodies. His remark struck me as so peculiarly lacking in lucidity that I looked at him in some anxiety, but he appeared perfectly normal. Suddenly he rose and strolled to the window. Here he is, he observed. Who? Began Jack Renaud. I sent a note up to the villa to ask him to come here. That changed the course of my ideas, and I asked Poirot if he knew that Jack Renaud had been in Merlinville on the night of the crime. I had hoped to catch my astute little friend napping, but as usual he was omniscient. He, too, had inquired at the station. And without doubt we are not original in the idea, Hastings. The excellent Giraud, he also has probably made his inquiries. You don't think, I said, and then stopped. No, it would be too horrible. Poirot looked inquiringly at me, but I said no more. It had just occurred to me that there were 7 women directly or indirectly connected with the case Mrs. Renaud, Madame d'Aubreuil and her daughter, the mysterious visitor, and the 3 servants. There was, with the exception of old August, who could hardly count, only one man, Jack Renaud, and a man must have dug a grave. I had no time to develop further the appalling idea that had occurred to me, for Jack Renaud was ushered into the room. Poirot greeted him in a business-like manner. Take a seat, monsieur. I regret infinitely to derange you, but you will perhaps understand that the atmosphere of the villa is not too congenial to me. Giraud and I do not see eye to eye about everything. His politeness to me has not been striking, and you will comprehend that I do not intend any little discoveries I may make to benefit him in any way. Exactly, Poirot, said the lad. That fellow Giraud is an ill-conditioned brute, and I'd be delighted to see some one score at his expense. Then I may ask a little favour of you. Certainly. I will ask you to go to the railway station and take a train to the next station along the line. Arbelac, ask there at the cloak-room whether 2 foreigners deposited a valise there on the night of the murder. It is a small station, and they are almost certain to remember. Of course I will, said the boy, mystified, though ready for the task. I and my friend, you comprehend, have business elsewhere, explained Poirot. There is a train in a quarter of an hour, and I will ask you not to return to the villa, as I have no wish for Giraud to get an inkling of your errand. Very well, I will go straight to the station. He rose to his feet. Poirot's voice stopped him. One moment, M. Renaud, there is one little matter that puzzles me. Why did you not mention to M. Hortet this morning that you were in Malinville on the night of the crime? Jack Reynolds' face went crimson. With an effort he controlled himself. You have made a mistake. I was in Cherbourg, as I told the examining magistrate this morning. Poirot looked at him, his eyes narrowed, cat-like, until they only showed a gleam of green. Then it is a singular mistake that I have made there, for it is shared by the station staff. They say you arrived by the 11:40 train. For a moment Jack Reynolds hesitated. Then he made up his mind. And if I did, I suppose you do not mean to accuse me of participating in my father's murder? He asked the question haughtily, his head thrown back. I should like an explanation of the reason that brought you here. That is simple enough. I came to see my fiancée, Mademoiselle d'Aubrieux. I was on the eve of a long voyage, uncertain as to when I should return. I wished to see her before I went, to assure her of my unchanging devotion. And you did see her. Poirot's eyes never left the other's face. There was an appreciable pause before Renaud replied. Then he said, Wes. And afterwards, I found I had missed the last train. I walked to St. Beauvais, where I knocked up a garage and got a car to take me back to Cherbourg. St. Beauvais? That is 15 kilometers. A long walk, M. Renaud. I felt like walking. Poirot bowed his head as a sign that he accepted the explanation. Jack Reynolds took up his hat and cane and departed. In a trice Poirot jumped to his feet. Quick, Hastings. We will go after him. Keeping a discreet distance behind our quarry, we followed him through the streets of Merlinville. But when Poirot saw that he took the turning to the station, he checked himself. All is well. He has taken the bait. He will go to Aberlac, and will inquire for the mythical valise left by the mythical foreigners. Yes, mon ami, all that was a little invention of my own. You wanted him out of the way. I exclaimed, Your penetration is amazing, Hastings. Now, if you please, we will go up to the Villa Geneva Bay. 18. Giraud acts. By the way, Poirot, I said, as we walked along the hot white road, I've got a bone to pick with you. I dare say you meant well, but really it was no business of yours to go marching round to the H-Tel-Du fair without letting me know. Poirot shot a quick sidelong glance at me. And how did you know I had been there? He inquired. Much to my annoyance, I felt the colour rising in my cheeks. I happened to look in passing. I explained with as much dignity as I could muster. I rather feared Poirot's banter, but to my relief, and somewhat to my surprise, he only shook his head with a rather unusual gravity. If I have offended your susceptibilities in any way, I demand pardon of you. You will understand better soon. But, believe me, I have striven to concentrate all my energies on the case. Oh, it's all right, I said, mollified by the apology. I know it's only that you have my interests at heart, but I can take care of myself all right. Poirot seemed to be about to say something further, but checked himself. Arrived at the villa, Poirot led the way up to the shed, where the second body had been discovered. He did not, however, go in, but paused by the bench, which I have mentioned before as being set some few yards away from it. After contemplating it for a moment or two, he paced carefully from it to the hedge which marked the boundary between the Villa Genevieve and the Villa Marguerite. Then he paced back again, nodding his head as he did so. Returning again to the hedge, he parted the bushes with his hands. With good fortune. He remarked to me over his shoulder, Mademoiselle Martha may find herself in the garden. I desire to speak to her, and would prefer not to call formally at the Villa Marguerite. Ah, all is well. There she is. Peste, mademoiselle, peste. Un moment, s'il vous plaît. I joined him at the moment that Martha Dobrewell, looking slightly startled, came running up to the hedge at his call. "Little word with you, mademoiselle, if it is permitted." "Certainly, Monsieur Poirot." Despite her acquiescence, her eyes looked troubled and afraid. "Mademoiselle, do you remember running after me on the road the day that I came to your house with the examining magistrate? You asked me if anyone was suspected of the crime, and you told me 2 Chileans." Her voice sounded rather breathless, and her left hand stole to her breast. "Will you ask me the same question again, mademoiselle?" "What do you mean?" "This. If you were to ask me that question again, I should give you a different answer. Someone is suspected." "But a Chilean?" "Who?" The word came faintly between her parted lips. Jack Reynolds." "What?" It was a cry. "Jack. Impossible. Who dares to suspect him?" "Gerard." "Gerard." The girl's face was ashy. "I am afraid of that man. He is cruel. He will. She broke off. There was courage gathering in her face, and determination. I realized in that moment that she was a fighter. Poirot, too, watched her intently. "You know, of course, that he was here on the night of the murder?" he asked. "Wes," she replied mechanically. "He told me." "It was unwise to have tried to conceal the fact," ventured Poirot. Yes, she replied impatiently, "but we cannot waste time on regrets. We must find something to save him. He is innocent, of course, but that will not help him with a man like Gerard, who has his reputation to think of. He must arrest someone, and that someone will be Jack." "The facts will tell against him," said Poirot. "You realize that?" She faced him squarely, and used the words I had heard her say in her mother's drawing-room. "I am not a child, Monsieur. I can be brave and look facts in the face. He is innocent, and we must save him." She spoke with a kind of desperate energy, then was silent, frowning as she thought. "Mademoiselle," said Poirot, observing her keenly, "is there not something that you are keeping back that you could tell us?" She nodded perplexedly. "Yes, there is something, but I hardly know whether you will believe it. It seems so absurd." "At any rate, tell us." "Mademoiselle, it is this. M. Gerard sent for me, as an afterthought, to see if I could identify the man in there." She signed with her head towards the shed. "I could not. At least I could not at the moment. But since I have been thinking, well, it seems so queer, and yet I am almost sure. I will tell you. On the morning of the day M. Reynard was murdered, I was walking in the garden here, when I heard a sound of men's voices quarrelling. I pushed aside the bushes and looked through. One of the men was M. Reynolds, and the other was a tramp, a dreadful-looking creature in filthy rags. He was alternately whining and threatening. I gathered he was asking for money, but at that moment Maman called me from the house, and I had to go. That is all. Only, I am almost sure that the tramp and the dead man in the shed are one and the same." Poirot uttered an exclamation. "But why did you not say so at the time, mademoiselle?" "Because at first it only struck me that the face was vaguely familiar in some way. The man was differently dressed, and apparently belonged to a superior station in life. But tell me, Monsieur Poirot, is it not possible that this tramp might have attacked and killed M. Reynolds, and taken his clothes and money?" "It is an idea, mademoiselle," said Poirot slowly. "It leaves a lot unexplained, but it is certainly an idea. I will think of it." A voice called from the house. "Maman," whispered Marthe, "I must go." And she slipped away through the trees. "Come," said Poirot, and taking my arm, turned in the direction of the villa. "What do you really think?" I asked in some curiosity. Was that story true, or did the girl make it up in order to divert suspicion from her lover? "It is a curious tale," said Poirot, "but I believe it to be the absolute truth. Unwittingly, Mademoiselle Martha told us the truth on another point, and incidentally gave Jack Reynolds the lie. Did you notice his hesitation when I asked him if he saw Martha Dobrewell on the night of the crime?" He paused and then said yes. I suspected that he was lying. It was necessary for me to see Mademoiselle Marthe before he could put her on her guard. 3 little words gave me the information I wanted. When I asked her if she knew that Jack Reynolds was here that night, she answered he told me. Now, Hastings, what was Jack Reynolds doing here on that eventful evening, and if he did not see Mademoiselle Marthe, whom did he see? Surely, Poirot, I cried, aghast. You cannot believe that a boy like that would murder his own father. But mon ami, said Poirot, you continue to be of a sentimentality unbelievable. I have seen mothers who murdered their little children for the sake of the insurance money. After that, one can believe anything. And the motive? Money, of course. Remember that Jack Reynolds thought that he would come into half his father's fortune at the latter's death. But the tramp, where does he come in? Poirot shrugged his shoulders. Giraud would say that he was an accomplice, an Apache who helped young Renaud to commit the crime, and who was conveniently put out of the way afterwards. But the hair round the dagger, the woman's hair. Ah, said Poirot, smiling broadly, that is the cream of Giraud's little jest. According to him, it is not a woman's hair at all. Remember that the youths of today wear their hair brushed straight back from the forehead with pomade or hair wash to make it lie flat. Consequently, some of the hairs are of considerable length. And you believe that too? No, said Poirot with a curious smile. For I know it to be the hair of a woman, and more, which woman, D'Aubreuil, I announced positively. Perhaps, said Poirot, regarding me quizzically, but I refused to allow myself to get annoyed. What are we going to do now? I asked, as we entered the hall of the Villa Genevieve. I wished to make a search amongst the effects of M. Jack Reynolds. That is why I had to get him out of the way for a few hours. But will not Giraud have searched already? I asked doubtfully. Of course, he builds a case, as a beaver builds a dam, with a fatiguing industry. But he will not have looked for the things that I am seeking. In all probability he would not have seen their importance if they stared him in the face. Let us begin. Neatly and methodically, Poirot opened each drawer in turn, examined the contents, and returned them exactly to their places. It was a singularly dull and uninteresting proceeding. Poirot waded on through collars, pyjamas, and socks. A purring noise outside drew me to the window. Instantly I became galvanized into life. For I cried, a car has just driven up. Giraud is in it, and Jack Reynolds, and 2 gendarmes. Sacre tonnerre, growled Poirot. That animal of a Giraud, could he not wait? I shall not be able to replace the things in this last drawer with the proper method. Let us be quick. Unceremoniously he tumbled out the things on the floor, mostly ties and handkerchiefs. Suddenly, with a cry of triumph, Poirot pounced on something, a small square cardboard, evidently a photograph, thrusting it into his pocket. He returned the things pell-mell to the drawer, and seizing me by the arm, dragged me out of the room and down the stairs. In the hall stood Giraud, contemplating his prisoner. "Good afternoon," said Poirot. "What have we here?" Giraud nodded his head towards Jack. He was trying to make a getaway, but I was too sharp for him. He is under arrest for the murder of his father, M. Paul Reynolds. Poirot wheeled to confront the boy who leaned limply against the door, his face ashy pale. "What do you say to that, Junholm?" Jack Reynolds stared at him stonily. "Nothing," he said. 19. I used my grey cells. I was dumbfounded. Up to the last, I had not been able to bring myself to believe Jack Reynolds guilty. I had expected a ringing proclamation of his innocence when Poirot challenged him. But now, watching him as he stood, white and limp, against the wall, and hearing the damning admission fall from his lips, I doubted no longer. But Poirot had turned to Giraud. "What are your grounds for arresting him? Do you expect me to give them to you? It is a matter of courtesy." "Yes." Giraud looked at him doubtfully. He was torn between a desire to refuse rudely and the pleasure of triumphing over his adversary. You think I have made a mistake, I suppose." He sneered. "It would not surprise me," replied Poirot, with a soupçon of malice. Gerard's face took on a deeper tinge of red. "If ye been come in here, you shall judge for yourself." He flung open the door of the salon, and we passed in, leaving Jack Renaud in the care of the two other men. "Now, Poirot," said Gerard, laying his hat on the table, and speaking with the utmost sarcasm, "I will treat you to a little lecture on detective work. I will show you how we moderns work." "Bien," said Poirot, composing himself to listen. "I will show you how admirably the old guard can listen." And he leaned back and closed his eyes, opening them for a moment to remark. "Do not fear that I shall sleep. I will attend most carefully, of course," began Gerard. "I soon saw through all that Chilean tomfoolery. 2 men were in it, but they were not mysterious foreigners. All that was a blind." "Very creditable, so far, my dear Gerard," murmured Poirot. "Especially after that clever trick of theirs with the match and cigarette end." Gerard glared, but continued. "A man must have been connected with the case, in order to dig the grave. There is no man who actually benefits by the crime, but there was a man who thought he would benefit. I heard of Jack Reynolds' quarrel with his father, and of the threats that he had used. The motive was established. Now as to means, Jack Renaud was in Malinville that night. He concealed the fact, which turned suspicion into certainty. We found a second victim stabbed with the same dagger. We know when that dagger was stolen. Captain Hastings here can fix the time. Jack Renaud, arriving from Cherbourg, was the only person who could have taken it. I have accounted for all the other members of the household." Poirot interrupted. "You are wrong. There is one other person who could have taken the dagger. You refer to Stoner. He arrived at the front door in an automobile which had brought him straight from Calais. Believe me, I have looked into everything. Jack Renaud arrived by train. An hour elapsed between his arrival and the moment he presented himself at the house. Without doubt, he saw Captain Hastings and his companion leave the shed, slipped in himself and took the dagger, stabbed his accomplice in the shed. Who was already dead?" Gerard shrugged his shoulders. "Possibly he did not observe that. He may have judged him to be sleeping. Without doubt they had a rendezvous. In any case, he knew this apparent second murder would greatly complicate the case. It did. But it could not deceive Gerard," murmured Poirot. "You mock yourself at me, but I will give you one last irrefutable proof. Madame Renaud's story was false, a fabrication from beginning to end. We believe Madame Renaud to have loved her husband, yet she lied to shield his murderer. For whom will a woman lie? Sometimes for herself, usually for the man she loves, always for her children. That is the last, the irrefutable proof. You cannot get round it." Gerard paused, flushed and triumphant. Poirot regarded him steadily. "That is my case," said Gerard. "What have you to say to it?" "Only that there is one thing you have failed to take into account." "What is that?" Jack Renaud was presumably acquainted with the planning out of the golf course. He knew that the body would be discovered almost at once, when they started to dig the bunker. Gerard laughed out loud. "But it is idiotic what you say there. He wanted the body to be found. Until it was found, he could not presume death, and would have been unable to enter into his inheritance." I saw a quick flash of green in Poirot's eyes as he rose to his feet. "Then why bury it?" he asked softly. "Reflect, Gerard. Since it was to Jack Renaud's advantage that the body should be found without delay, why dig a grave at all?" Gerard did not reply. The question found him unprepared. He shrugged his shoulders as though to intimate that it was of no importance. Poirot moved towards the door. I followed him. "There is one more thing that you have failed to take into account," he said over his shoulder. "What is that?" "The piece of lead piping," said Poirot, and left the room. Jack Renaud still stood in the hall, with a white, dumb face, but as we came out of the salon, He looked up sharply. At the same moment there was the sound of a footfall on the staircase. Mrs. Renaud was descending it. At the sight of her son, standing between the two myrmidons of the law, she stopped as though petrified. "Jack," she faltered. "Jack, what is this?" He looked up at her, his face set. "They have arrested me, mother." "What?" She uttered a piercing cry, and before anyone could get to her swayed and fell heavily. We both ran to her and lifted her up. In a minute Poirot stood up again. "She has cut her head badly on the corner of the stairs. I fancy there is a slight concussion also. If Giraud wants a statement from her, he will have to wait. She will probably be unconscious for at least a week." Denise and Francin always had run to their mistress, and leaving her in their charge, Poirot left the house. He walked with his head bent down, frowning thoughtfully at the ground. For some time I did not speak, but at last I ventured to put a question to him. "Do you believe, then, in spite of all appearances to the contrary, that Jack Renaud may not be guilty?" Poirot did not answer at once, but after a long wait he said gravely, "I do not know Hastings. There is just a chance of it. Of course Giraud is all wrong, wrong from beginning to end. If Jack Renaud is guilty, it is in spite of Giraud's arguments, not because of them. And the gravest indictment against him is known only to me." "What is that?" I asked, impressed. "If you would use your grey cells, and see the whole case clearly as I do, you too would perceive it, my friend." This was what I called one of Poirot's irritating answers. He went on, without waiting for me to speak. "Let us walk this way to the sea. We will sit on that little mound there, overlooking the beach, and review the case. You shall know all that I know, but I would prefer that you should come at the truth by your own efforts, not by my leading you by the hand." We established ourselves on the grassy knoll, as Poirot had suggested, looking out to sea. From farther along the sand, the cries of the bathers reached us faintly. The sea was of the palest blue, and the halcyon calm reminded me of the day we had arrived at Malinville, my own good spirits, and Poirot's suggestion that I was fee. What a long time seemed to have elapsed since then, and in reality it was only 3 days. "Think, my friend," said Poirot's voice encouragingly. "Arrange your ideas. Be methodical, be orderly. There is the secret of success." I endeavored to obey him, casting my mind back over all the details of the case, and reluctantly it seemed to me that the only clear and possible solution was that of Giraud, which Poirot despised. I reflected anew. If there was daylight anywhere, it was in the direction of Madame d'Aubgril. Giraud was ignorant of her connection with the Barreldy case. Poirot had declared the Barreldy case to be all-important. It was there I must seek. I was on the right track now, and suddenly I started as an idea of bewildering luminosity shot into my brain. Trembling, I built up my hypothesis. "You have a little idea, I see, mon an, capital. We progress." I sat up and lit a pipe. "Poirot," I said, "it seems to me we have been strangely remiss. I say we, although I dare say I would be nearer the mark. But you must pay the penalty of your determined secrecy. So I say again we have been strangely remiss. There is someone we have forgotten." "And who is that?" inquired Poirot with twinkling eyes. "Georges Connu, 20, an amazing statement." The next moment Poirot embraced me warmly. "Enfin, you have arrived. And all by yourself? It is superb. Continue your reasoning. You are right. Decidedly, we have done wrong to forget Georges Connu." I was so flattered by the little man's approval that I could hardly continue. But at last I collected my thoughts and went on. "Georges Connu disappeared 20 years ago, but we have no reason to believe that he is dead." "Aucunement," agreed Poirot. "Proceed." "Therefore we will assume that he is alive." "Exactly. Or that he was alive until recently. Demiux en miux. We will presume," I continued, my enthusiasm rising, "that he has fallen on evil days. He has become a criminal, and a patch, a tramp, what you will. He chances to come to Merlinville. There he finds the woman he has never ceased to love." "Yea!" The sentimentality, warned Poirot. Vere one hates, one also loves, I quoted or misquoted. At any rate, he finds her there, living under an assumed name. But she has a new lover, the Englishman, Reynolds. George's connu, the memory of old wrongs rising in him, quarrels with this Reynolds. He lies in wait for him as he comes to visit his mistress, and stabs him in the back. Then, terrified at what he has done, he starts to dig a grave. I imagine it likely that Madame d'Aubriel comes out to look for her lover. She and Canau have a terrible scene. He drags her into the shed, and there suddenly falls down in an epileptic fit. Now supposing Jack Reynolds to appear, Madame d'Aubriel tells him all, points out to him the dreadful consequences to her daughter if this scandal of the past is revived. His father's murderer is dead, let them do their best to hush it up. Jack Reynolds consents, goes to the house, and has an interview with his mother, winning her over to his point of view. Primed with the story that Madame d'Aubriel has suggested to him, she permits herself to be gagged and bound. There, Poirot, what do you think of that? I leaned back, flushed with the pride of successful reconstruction. Poirot looked at me thoughtfully. I think that you should write for the Kinema, mon ami, he remarked at last. You mean? It would make a good film, the story that you have recounted to me there. But it bears no sort of resemblance to everyday life. I admit that I haven't gone into all the details, but you have gone further. You have ignored them magnificently. What about the way the two men were dressed? Do you suggest that after stabbing his victim, Quenille removed his suit of clothes, donned it himself, and replaced the dagger? I don't see that that matters, I objected rather huffily. He may have obtained clothes and money from Madame d'Aubriel by threats earlier in the day. By threats. Eh? You seriously advance that supposition? Certainly. He could have threatened to reveal her identity to the Reynolds, which would probably have put an end to all hopes of her daughter's marriage. You are wrong. Hastings. He could not blackmail her, for she had the whip hand. George's canoe, remember, is still wanted for murder. A word from her, and he is in danger of the guillotine. I was forced, rather reluctantly, to admit the truth of this. Your theory, I remarked acidly, is doubtless correct as to all the details. My theory is the truth, said Poirot quietly. And the truth is necessarily correct. In your theory you made a fundamental error. You permitted your imagination to lead you astray with midnight assignations and passionate love scenes. But in investigating crime we must take our stand upon the commonplace. Shall I demonstrate my methods to you? Oh, by all means let us have a demonstration. Poirot sat very upright and began wagging his forefinger emphatically to emphasize his points. I will start as you started, from the basic fact of George's connu. Now, the story told by Madame Barreldiancourt as to the Russians was admittedly a fabrication. If she was innocent of connivance in the crime, it was concocted by her, and by her only as she stated. If, on the other hand, she was not innocent, it might have been invented by either her or George's canoe. Now, in this case we are investigating, we meet the same tale. As I pointed out to you, the facts render it very unlikely that Madame d'Aubriel inspired it, so we turn to the hypothesis that the story had its origin in the brain of George's canoe. Very good. George's canoe, therefore, planned the crime with Madame Reynolds as his accomplice. She is in the limelight, and behind her is a shadowy figure whose alias is unknown to us. Now let us go carefully over the Reynolds case from the beginning, setting down each significant point in its chronological order. You have a notebook and pencil. Good. Now what is the earliest point to note down? The letter to you? That was the first we knew of it, but it is not the proper beginning of the case. The first point of any significance, I should say, is the change that came over M. Reynolds shortly after arriving in Merlinville, and which is attested to by several witnesses. We have also to consider his friendship with Madame d'Aubriel, and the large sums of money paid over to her. From thence we can come directly to the 23rd May. Poirot paused, cleared his throat, and signed to me to write. 3rd May. M. Renaud quarrels with his son over latter's wish to marry Martha d'Aubrieux. Son leaves for Paris, 24th May. M. Renaud alters his will, leaving entire control of his fortune in his wife's hands. 7th June. Quarrel with tramp in garden, witnessed by Marthe d'Aubrieux. Letter written to M. Hercule Poirot imploring assistance. Telegram sent to Jack Renaud, bidding him proceed by the Anzora to Buenos Aires. Chauffier, Masters, sent off on a holiday. Visit of a lady that evening. As he is seeing her out, his words are a yes, yes. But for God's sake go now. Huh? Poirot paused. Dear Hastings, take each of those facts one by one. Consider them carefully by themselves and in relation to the whole, and see if you do not get new light on the matter. I endeavoured conscientiously to do, as he had said. After a moment or two, I said rather doubtfully, as to the first points, the question seems to be whether we adopt the theory of blackmail or of an infatuation for this woman. Blackmail, decidedly. You heard what Stoner said as to his character and habits. Mrs. Renaud did not confirm his view. I argued. We have already seen that Madame Renaud's testimony cannot be relied upon in any way. We must trust to Stoner on that point. Still, if Renaud had an affair with a woman called Bella, there seems no inherent improbability in his having another with Madame d'Aubrieux. None whatever, I grant you, Hastings. But did he? The letter, Poirot? You forget the letter. No, I do not forget. But what makes you think that letter was written to M. Renaud? Why it was found in his pocket and that is all, cut in Poirot. There was no mention of any name to show to whom the letter was addressed. We assumed it was to the dead man, because it was in the pocket of his overcoat. Now, mon ami, something about that overcoat struck me as unusual. I measured it, and made the remark that he wore his overcoat very long. That remark should have given you to think. I thought you were just saying it for the sake of saying something. I confessed.
Ah, quelle idea!
Later you observed me measuring the overcoat of M. Jack Renaud. Jack Renaud wears his overcoat very short. Put those two facts together with a third, namely that M. Jack Renaud flung out of the house in a hurry on his departure for Paris, and tell me what you make of it. I see, I said slowly, as the meaning of Poirot's remarks bore in upon me. That letter was written to Jack Renaud, not to his father. He caught up the wrong overcoat in his haste and agitation. Poirot nodded. Précisément, we can return to this point later. For the moment let us content ourselves with accepting the letter as having nothing to do with M. Renaud-Pierre, and pass to the next chronological event. May 23rd. I re-emmed. Renaud quarrels with his son over latter's wish to marry Marthe d'Aubrieux. Son leaves for Paris. I don't see anything much to remark upon there, and the altering of the will the following day seems straightforward enough. It was the direct result of the quarrel. We agree, mon ami, at least as to the cause. But what exact motive underlay this procedure of M. Renaud's? I opened my eyes in surprise. Anger against his son, of course. Yet he wrote him affectionate letters to Paris. So Jack Renaud says, but he cannot produce them. Well, let us pass from that. No, we come to the day of the tragedy. You have placed the events of the morning in a certain order. Have you any justification for that? I have ascertained that the letter to me was posted at the same time as the telegram was dispatched. Masters was informed he could take a holiday shortly afterwards. In my opinion, the quarrel with the tramp took place anterior to these happenings. I do not see that you can fix that definitely, unless you question Mademoiselle de Breuil again. There is no need. I am sure of it. And if you do not see that, you see nothing. Hastings. I looked at him for a moment. Of course, I am an idiot. If the tramp was George's canoe, it was after the stormy interview with him that Mr. Renaud apprehended danger. He sent away the chauffeur masters, whom he suspected of being in the other's pay. He wired to his son and sent for you. A faint smile crossed Poirot's lips. You do not think it strange that he should use exactly the same expressions in his letter as Madame Renaud used later in her story? If the mention of Santiago was a blind, why should Renaud speak of it? And what is more, sent his son there? It is puzzling, I admit, but perhaps we shall find some explanation later. We come now to the evening and the visit of the mysterious lady. I confess that fairly baffles me, unless it was Madame d'Aubrieuil, as Franfoys all along maintained. Poirot shook his head. My friend, where are your wits wandering? Remember the fragment of Chic, and the fact that the name Bella Duveen was faintly familiar to Stoner, and I think we may take it for granted that Bella Duveen is the full name of Jack's unknown correspondent, and that it was she who came to the Villa Genevieve that night. Whether she intended to see Jack, or whether she meant all along to appeal to his father, we cannot be certain, but I think we may assume that this is what occurred. She produced her claim upon Jack, probably showed letters that he had written her, and the older man tried to buy her off by writing a cheek. This she indignantly tore up. The terms of her letter are those of a woman genuinely in love, and she would probably deeply resent being offered money. In the end he got rid of her, and here the words that he used are significant. Yes, but for God's sake go now, I repeated. They seemed to me a little vehement, perhaps, that is all. That is enough. He was desperately anxious for the girl to go. Why? Not only because the interview was unpleasant. No, it was the time that was slipping by, and for some reason time was precious. Why should it be? I asked, bewildered. That is what we ask ourselves. Why should it be? But later we have the incident of the wrist watch, which again shows us that time plays a very important part in the crime. We are now fast approaching the actual drama. It is 10:30 when Bella Duveen leaves, and by the evidence of the wrist-watch we know that the crime was committed, or at any rate that it was staged, before 12 o'clock. We have reviewed all the events anterior to the murder. There remains only one unplaced. By the doctor's evidence, the tramp, when found, had been dead at least 48 hours, with a possible margin of 24 hours more. Now, with no other facts to help me than those we have discussed, I place the death as having occurred on the morning of June 7th. I stared at him, stupefied. But how? Why? How can you possibly know? Because only in that way can the sequence of events be logically explained. Mon ami, I have taken you step by step along the way. Do you not now see what is so glaringly plain? My dear Poirot, I can't see anything glaring about it. I did think I was beginning to see my way before, but I'm now hopelessly fogged. Poirot looked at me sadly and shook his head.
Mon Dieu! But it is Triss! A good intelligence,
and so deplorably lacking in method. There is an exercise most excellent for the development of the little grey cells. I will impart it to you. For heaven's sake, not now. You really are the most irritating of fellows, Poirot. For goodness' sake, get on and tell me who killed M. Renaud. That is just what I am not sure of as yet, but you said it was glaringly clear. We talk at cross purposes, my friend. Remember, it is 2 crimes we are investigating, for which, as I pointed out to you, we have the necessary 2 bodies. There, ne vas impatientes pas? I explain all. To begin with, we apply our psychology. We find 3 points at which M. Renaud displays a distinct change of view and action. 3 psychological points, therefore. The first occurs immediately after arriving in Merlinville, the second after quarrelling with his son on a certain subject, the third on the morning of June 7th. Now for the 3 causes. We can attribute number 1 to meeting Madame d'Aubrieuil. Number 2 is indirectly connected with her since it concerns a marriage between M., Renaud's son, and her daughter. But the cause of number 3 is hidden from us. We have to deduce it. Now, mon ami, let me ask you a question. Who do we believe to have planned this crime? George's canoe? I said doubtfully, eyeing Poirot warily. Exactly. Now Giraud laid it down as an axiom that a woman lies to save herself, the man she loves, and her child. Since we are satisfied that it was George's canoe who dictated the lie to her, and as George's canoe is not Jack Reynolds, follows that the third case is put out of court. And, still attributing the crime to George's canoe, the first is equally so. So we are forced to the second, that Madame Reynolds lied for the sake of the man she loved, or in other words, for the sake of George's canoe. You agree to that? Wes, I admitted. It seems logical enough. Bien, Madame Reynolds loves George's canoe. Who, then, is George's canoe? The tramp. Have we any evidence to show that Madame Reynolds loved the tramp? No but. Very well, then. Do not cling to theories where facts no longer support them. Ask yourself instead who Madame Reynolds did love. I shook my head perplexed. Mais Zoe, you know perfectly. Who did Madame Reynolds love so dearly that when she saw his dead body, she fell down in a swoon? I stared, dumbfounded. I gasped. Poirot nodded. Her husband, or George's canoe, whichever you like to call him. I rallied myself. But it's impossible. How impossible? Did we not agree just now that Madame d'Aubrieux was in a position to blackmail George's canoe? Wes, but... And did she not very effectively blackmail Reynolds? That may be true enough, but... And is it not a fact that we know nothing of Reynolds' youth and upbringing, that he springs suddenly into existence as a French-Canadian exactly 22 years ago? All that is so, I said more firmly, but you seem to me to be overlooking one salient point. What is it, my friend? Why, we have admitted George's canoe planned the crime. That brings us to the ridiculous statement that he planned his own murder. Fais bien, mon ami, said Poirot placidly. That is just what he did do. Turkey 1. Hercule Poirot on the case. In a measured voice, Poirot began his exposition. It seems strange to you, mon ami, that a man should plan his own death. So strange that you prefer to reject the truth as fantastic, and to revert to a story that is in reality 10 times more impossible. Yes, Reynolds planned his own death, but there is one detail that perhaps escapes you. He did not intend to die. I shook my head, bewildered. But no, it is all most simple, really, said Poirot kindly. For the crime that Reynolds proposed a murderer was not necessary, as I told you, but a body was. Let us reconstruct, seeing events this time from a different angle. George's canoe flies from justice to Canada. There, under an assumed name, he marries, and finally acquires a vast fortune in South America. But there is a nostalgia upon him for his own country. 20 years have elapsed. He is considerably changed in appearance, besides being a man of such eminence that no one is likely to connect him with a fugitive from justice many years ago. He deems it quite safe to return. He takes up his headquarters in England, but intends to spend the summers in France, and ill fortune, that obscure justice which shapes men's ends, and will not allow them to evade the consequences of their acts, takes him to Malinville. There, in the whole of France, is the one person who is capable of recognizing him. It is, of course, a gold mine to Madame d'Aubrieux, and a gold mine of which she is not slow to take advantage. He is helpless, absolutely in her power, and she bleeds him heavily, and then the inevitable happens. Jack Reynolds falls in love with the beautiful girl he sees almost daily, and wishes to marry her. That rouses his father, at all costs. He will prevent his son marrying the daughter of this evil woman. Jack Reynolds knows nothing of his father's past, but Madame Reynolds knows everything. She is a woman of great force of character, and passionately devoted to her husband. They take counsel together. Reynolds sees only one way of escape, death. He must appear to die, in reality escaping to another country, where he will start again under an assumed name, and where Madame Reynolds, having played the widow's part for a while, can join him. It is essential that she should have control of the money, so he alters his will. How they meant to manage the body business originally, I do not know. Possibly an art student's skeleton, and a fire or something of the kind, but long before their plans have matured an event occurs which plays into their hands. A rough tramp, violent and abusive, finds his way into the garden. There is a struggle. M. Renaud seeks to eject him, and suddenly the tramp, an epileptic, falls down in a fit. He is dead. M. Renaud calls his wife. Together they drag him into the shed. As we know, the event had occurred just outside, and they realize the marvelous opportunity that has been vouchsafed them. The man bears no resemblance to M. Renaud, but he is middle-aged, of a usual French type. That is sufficient. I rather fancy that they sat on the bench up there, out of earshot from the house, discussing matters. Their plan was quickly made. The identification must rest solely on Madame Renaud's evidence. Jack Renaud and the chauffeur, who had been with his master 2 years, must be got out of the way. It was unlikely that the French women servants would go near the body, and in any case Renaud intended to take measures to deceive anyone not likely to appreciate details. Masters was sent off, a telegram dispatched to Jack, Buenos Aires being selected to give credence to the story that Renaud had decided upon. Having heard of me as a rather obscure elderly detective, he wrote his appeal for help, knowing that, when I arrived, the production of the letter would have a profound effect upon the examining magistrate, which, of course, it did. They dressed the body of the tramp in a suit of M. Renaud's and left his ragged coat and trousers by the door of the shed, not daring to take them into the house. And then, to give credence to the tale Madame Renaud was to tell, they drove the aeroplane dagger through his heart. That night, Renaud will first bind and gag his wife, and then, taking a spade, will dig a grave in that particular spot of ground where he knows her. How do you call it? Bunker. Is to be made. It is essential that the body should be found. Madame d'Aubreuil must have no suspicions. On the other hand, if a little time elapses, any dangers as to identity will be greatly lessened. Then N. Renaud will don the tramp's rags and shuffle off to the station, where he will leave, unnoticed, by the 2:10 train. Since the crime will be supposed to have taken place 2 hours later, no suspicion can possibly attach to him. You see now his annoyance at the inopportune visit of the girl Bella. Every moment of delay is fatal to his plans. He gets rid of her as soon as he can, however. Then, to work, he leaves the front door slightly ajar to create the impression that the assassins left that way. He binds and gags Madame Renaud, correcting his mistake of 22 years ago, when the looseness of the bonds caused suspicion to fall upon his accomplice, but leaving her primed with essentially the same story as he had invented before, proving the unconscious recoil of the mind against originality. The night is chilly, and he slips on an overcoat over his underclothing, intending to cast it into the grave with the dead man. He goes out by the window, smoothing over the flower bed carefully, and thereby furnishing the most positive evidence against himself. He goes out onto the lonely golf links, and he digs, and then— Yes. And then, said Poirot gravely, the justice that he has so long eluded overtakes him. An unknown hand stabs him in the back. See now? Hastings, you understand what I mean when I talk of 2 crimes. The first crime, the crime that emptied Renaud, in his arrogance, asked us to investigate. But he made a famous mistake there. He misjudged Hercule Poirot, is solved. But behind it lies a deeper riddle, and to solve that will be difficult, since the criminal, in his wisdom, has been content to avail himself of the devices prepared by M. Renaud. It has been a particularly perplexing and baffling mystery to solve. A young hand like Giraud, who does not place any reliance on the psychology, is almost certain to fail. You're marvelous, Poirot, I said. Absolutely marvelous. No one on earth but you could have done it. I think my praise pleased him. For once in his life, he looked almost embarrassed. Then you no longer despise poor old Papa Poirot. You shift your allegiance back from the human foxhound. His term for Giraud never failed to make me smile. Rather, you've scored over him handsomely. That poor Giraud, said Poirot, trying unsuccessfully to look modest. Without doubt it is not all stupidity. He has had Le Mauvais chance once or twice. That dark hair coiled round the dagger, for instance. To say the least, it was misleading. To tell you the truth, Poirot, I said slowly, even now I don't quite see whose hair was it. Madame Reynolds, of course. That is where Le Mauvais chance came in. Her hair, dark originally, is almost completely silvered. It might just as easily have been a grey hair. And then, by no conceivable effort could Giraud have persuaded himself it came from the head of Jack Renaud. But it is all of a piece. Always the facts must be twisted to fit the theory. Did not Giraud find the traces of two persons, a man and a woman, in the shed? And how does that fit in with his reconstruction of the case? I will tell you it does not fit in, and so we shall hear no more of them. I ask you, is that a methodical way of working? The great Giraud is nothing but a toy balloon, swollen with its own importance. But Hercule Poirot, whom he despises, will be the little pin that pricks the big balloon, comme ça. And he made an expressive gesture. Then, calming down, he resumed, without doubt, when Madame Renaud recovers, she will speak. The possibility of her son being accused of the murder never occurred to her. How should it, when she believed him safely at sea on board the Anzora? Ah, voilà femme, Hastings. What force, what self-command. She only made one slip. On his unexpected return, it does not matter. Now, and no one noticed, no one realized the significance of those words. What a terrible part she has had to play, poor woman. Imagine the shock when she goes to identify the body, and instead of what she expects, sees the actual lifeless form of the husband she has believed miles away by now. No wonder she fainted. But since then, despite her grief and her despair, how resolutely she has played her part, and how the anguish of it must wring her. She cannot say a word to set us on the track of the real murderers. For her son's sake, no one must know that Paul Renaud was George's canoe, the criminal. Final and most bitter blow. She has admitted publicly that Madame d'Aubrieux was her husband's mistress. For a hint of blackmail might be fatal to her secret. How cleverly she dealt with the examining magistrate when he asked her if there was any mystery in her husband's past life. Nothing so romantic, I am sure, Emily Juge. It was perfect, the indulgent tone, the soup on of sad mockery. At once Hortet felt himself foolish and melodramatic. Yes, she is a great woman. If she loved a criminal, she loved him royally. Poirot lost himself in contemplation. One thing more. Poirot, what about the piece of lead piping? You do not see. To disfigure the victim's face so that it would be unrecognizable. It was that which first set me on the right track. And that imbecile of a Giraud, swarming all over it to look for match-ends, did I not tell you that a clue of 2 feet long was quite as good as a clue of 2 inches? Well, Giraud will sing small now, I observed hastily, to lead the conversation away from my own shortcomings. As I said before, will he? If he has arrived at the right person by the wrong method, he will not permit that to worry him. But surely, I paused as I saw the new trend of things. You see, Hastings, we must now start again. Who killed M. Renaud? Someone who was near the villa just before 12 o'clock that night. Someone who would benefit by his death. The description fits Jack Renaud only too well. The crime need not have been premeditated. And then the dagger, I started. I had not realized that point. Of course, I said. The second dagger we found in the tramp was Mrs. Reynolds. There were 2, then? Certainly, and since they were duplicates, it stands to reason that Jack Renaud was the owner. But that would not trouble me so much. In fact, I have a little idea as to that. No. The worst indictment against him is again psychological. Heredity, mon ami, heredity, like father, like son. Jack Renaud, when all is said or done, is the son of George's canoe. His tone was grave and earnest, and I was impressed in spite of myself. "What is your little idea that you mentioned just now?" I asked. For answer, Poirot consulted his turnip-faced watch, and then asked, "What time is the afternoon boat from Calais?" "About 5, I believe." "That will do very well. We shall just have time. You are going to England."
"Wes?"
"What, my friend?" "To find a possible witness." "Who?" With a rather peculiar smile upon his face, Poirot replied, "Miss Bella Duveen." "But how will you find her? What do you know about her?" "I know nothing about her, but I can guess a good deal. We may take for granted that her name is Bella Duveen, and since that name was faintly familiar to M. Stoner, though evidently not in connection with the Renaud family, it is probable that she is on the stage. Jack Renaud was a young man with plenty of money and 20 years of age. The stage is sure to have been the home of his first love. It tallies, too, with M. Renaud's attempt to placate her with a cheek. I think I shall find her all right, especially with the help of this." And he brought out the photograph I had seen him take from Jack Renaud's drawer. "With love from Bella" was scrawled across the corner, but it was not that which held my eyes fascinated. The likeness was not first-rate, but for all that it was unmistakable to me. I felt a cold sinking, as though some unutterable calamity had befallen me. It was the face of Cinderella, 22, I find love. For a moment or two I sat as though frozen, the photograph still in my hand. Then, summoning all my courage to appear unmoved, I handed it back. At the same time, I stole a quick glance at Poirot. Had he noticed anything? But to my relief he did not seem to be observing me. Anything unusual in my manner had certainly escaped him. He rose briskly to his feet. "We have no time to lose. We must make our departure with all dispatch. All is well. The sea it will be calm." In the bustle of departure, I had no time for thinking, but once on board the boat, secure from Poirot's observation, he, as usual, was practising the method most excellent of Lavigueur. I pulled myself together and attacked the facts dispassionately. How much did Poirot know? Was he aware that my acquaintance of the train and Bella Duveen were one and the same? Why had he gone to the H. Tel Du fair, on my behalf as I had believed? Or had I only fatuously thought so, and was this visit undertaken with a deeper and more sinister purpose? But in any case, why was he bent on finding this girl? Did he suspect her of having seen Jack Renaud commit the crime? Or did he suspect? But that was impossible. The girl had no grudge against the elder Renaud, no possible motive for wishing his death. What had brought her back to the scene of the murder? I went over the facts carefully. She must have left the train at Calais, where I parted from her that day. No wonder I had been unable to find her on the boat. If she had dined in Calais, and then taken a train out to Malinville, she would have arrived at the Villa Genevieve just about the time that Frank Oys said. What had she done when she left the house just after 10? Presumably either gone to an hotel or returned to Calais. And then? The crime had been committed on Tuesday night. On Thursday morning she was once more in Merlinville. Had she ever left France at all? I doubted it very much. What kept her there? The hope of seeing Jack Renaud. I had told her Achen, as at the time we believed, that he was on the high seas en route to Buenos Aires. Possibly she was aware that the Anzura had not sailed. But to know that she must have seen Jack. Was that what Poirot was after? Had Jack Renaud, returning to see Martha d'Aubriel, come face to face instead with Bella Duveen, the girl he had heartlessly thrown over? I began to see daylight. If that were indeed the case, it might furnish Jack with the alibi he needed. Yet under those circumstances his silence seemed difficult to explain. Why could he not have spoken up boldly? Did he fear for this former entanglement of his to come to the ears of Martha d'Aubriel? I shook my head, dissatisfied. The thing had been harmless enough, a foolish boy and girl affair, and I reflected cynically that the son of a millionaire was not likely to be thrown over by a penniless French girl, who moreover loved him devotedly, without a much graver cause. Altogether I found the affair puzzling and unsatisfactory. I disliked intensely being associated with Poirot in hunting this girl down, but I could not see any way of avoiding it, without revealing everything to him, and this, for some reason, I was loath to do. Poirot reappeared brisk and smiling at Dover, and our journey to London was uneventful. It was past 9 o'clock when we arrived, and I supposed that we should return straight away to our rooms and do nothing till the morning. But Poirot had other plans. We must lose no time, mon ami. The news of the arrest will not be in the English papers until the day after tomorrow, but still we must lose no time. I did not quite follow his reasoning, but I merely asked how he proposed to find the girl. You remember Joseph Aarons, the theatrical agent? No, I assisted him in a little matter of a Japanese wrestler. A pretty little problem. I must recount it to you one day. He, without doubt, will be able to put us in the way of finding out what we want to know. It took us some time to run Mr. Aarons to earth, and it was after midnight when we finally managed it. He greeted Poirot with every evidence of warmth, and professed himself ready to be of service to us in any way. "There's not much about the profession I don't know," he said, beaming genially. "E.B. N. Aarons, I desire to find a young girl called Bella Duveen." Bella Duveen. I know the name, but for the moment I can't place it. What's her line? That I do not know, but here is her photograph. Monsieur. Aarons studied it for a moment, then his face lighted. Got it? He slapped his thigh. The Dulcibella kids, by the Lord. The Dulcibella kids. That's it. They're sisters, acrobats, dancers, and singers. Give quite a good little turn. They're in the provinces somewhere, I believe, if they're not resting. They've been on in Paris for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Can you find out for me exactly where they are? Easy as a bird. You go home, and I'll send you round the dope in the morning. With this promise we took leave of him. He was as good as his word. About 11 o'clock the following day, a scribbled note reached us. The Dulcibella sisters are on at the palace in Coventry. Good luck to you. Without more ado, we started for Coventry. Poirot made no inquiries at the theatre, but contented himself with booking stalls for the variety performance that evening. The show was wearisome beyond words. Or perhaps it only my mood that made it seem so. Japanese families balanced themselves precariously. Would-be fashionable men in greenish evening dress and exquisitely slicked hair reeled off society patter and danced marvellously. Stout prima donna sang at the top of the human register. A comic comedian endeavoured to be Mr. George Robey and failed signally. At last the number went up, which announced the Dulcibella kids. My heart beat sickeningly. There she was. There they both were, the pair of them, one flaxen-haired, one dark, matching as to size, with short fluffy skirts and immense buster-brown bows. They looked a pair of extremely piquant children. They began to sing. Their voices were fresh and true, rather thin and music-hally, but attractive. It was quite a pretty little turn. They danced neatly, and did some clever little acrobatic feats. The words of their songs were crisp and catchy. When the curtain fell, there was a full meed of applause. Evidently the Dulcibella kids were a success. Suddenly I felt that I could remain no longer. I must get out into the air, I suggested, leaving to Poirot. Go by all means, mon ami. I amuse myself, and will stay to the end. I will rejoin you later. It was only a few steps from the theatre to the hotel. I went up to the sitting-room, ordered a whisky and soda, and sat drinking it, staring meditatively into the empty grate. I heard the door open, and turned my head, thinking it was Poirot. Then I jumped to my feet. It was Cinderella who stood in the doorway. She spoke haltingly, her breath coming in little gasps. I saw you in front, you and your friend. When you got up to go, I was waiting outside and followed you. Why are you here? In Coventry? What were you doing there tonight? Is the man who was with you the detective? She stood there, the cloak she had wrapped round her stage dress slipping from her shoulders. I saw the whiteness of her cheeks under the rouge, and heard the terror in her voice. and in that moment I understood everything. Understood why Poirot was seeking her, and what she feared, and understood at last my own heart.
"Wes?"
I said gently.
"Is he looking for me?"
she half-whispered. Then, as I did not answer for a moment, she slipped down by the big chair and burst into violent, bitter weeping. I knelt down by her, holding her in my arms and smoothing the hair back from her face. "Don't cry, child, don't cry, for God's sake. You're safe here? I'll take care of you. Don't cry, darling. Don't cry? I know everything. Oh, but you don't." I think I do. And after a moment, as her sobs grew quieter, I asked, "It was you who took the dagger, wasn't it?" "Wes." "That was why you wanted me to show you round, and why you pretended to faint?" Again she nodded. It was a strange thought to come to me at the moment, but it shot into my mind that I was glad her motive was what it had been, rather than the idle and morbid curiosity I had accused her of at the time. How gallantly she had played her part that day, inwardly racked with fear and trepidation as she must have been. Poor little soul, bearing the burden of a moment's impetuous action. "Where did you take the dagger?" I asked presently. She replied as simply as a child. "I was afraid there might be finger marks on it." "But didn't you remember that you had worn gloves?" She shook her head as though bewildered, and then said slowly, "Are you going to give me up to the police?" Good God! No, her eyes sought mine long and earnestly, and then she asked in a little quiet voice that sounded afraid of itself, "We not?" It seemed a strange place and a strange time for a declaration of love, and God knows, in all my imagining, I had never pictured love coming to me in such a guise. But I answered simply and naturally enough, "Because I love you, Cinderella." She bent her head down as though ashamed, and muttered in a broken voice, you can't, not if you knew." And then, as though rallying herself, she faced me squarely and asked, "What do you know then?" "I know that you came to see Mr. Renaud that night. He offered you a cheek, and you tore it up indignantly. Then you left the house." I paused. "Go on." "What next?" "Don't know whether you knew that Jack Renaud would be coming that night, or whether you just waited about on the chance of seeing him, but you did wait about. Perhaps you were just miserable and walked aimlessly, but at any rate just before 12 you were still near there, and you saw a man on the golf links." Again I paused. I had lipped to the truth in a flash as she entered the room, but now the picture rose before me even more convincingly. I saw vividly the peculiar pattern of the overcoat on the dead body of Mr. Renaud, and I remembered the amazing likeness that had startled me into believing for one instant that the dead man had risen from the dead when his son burst into our conclave in the salon. "Go on," repeated the girl steadily. "I fancy his back was to you, but you recognized him, or thought you recognized him. The gait and the carriage were familiar to you, and the pattern of his overcoat." I paused. "You told me in the train on the way from Paris that you had Italian blood in your veins, and that you had nearly got into trouble once with it. You used a threat in one of your letters to Jack Renaud. When you saw him there, your anger and jealousy drove you mad, and you struck. I don't believe for a minute that you meant to kill him. But you did kill him, Cinderella." She had flung up her hands to cover her face, and in a choked voice she said, "You're right, Shabby, you're right. I can see it all as you tell it." Then she turned on me almost savagely. "And you love me. Knowing what you do, how can you love me?" "I don't know," I said a little warily. "I think love is like that, a thing one cannot help. I have tried, I know. Ever since the first day I met you, and love has been too strong for me." And then suddenly, when I least expected it, she broke down again, casting herself down on the floor and sobbing wildly. "Oh, I can't," she cried. "I don't know what to do. I don't know which way to turn. Oh, pity me, someone, and tell me what to do." Again I knelt by her, soothing her as best I could. Don't be afraid of me, Bella. For God's sake, don't be afraid of me. I love you, that's true, but I don't want anything in return. Only let me help you. Love him still if you have to, but let me help you as he can't." It was as though she had been turned to stone by my words. She raised her head from her hands and stared at me. "You think that?" she whispered. "You think that I love Jack Reynolds." Then, half laughing, half crying, she flung her arms passionately round my neck and pressed her sweet, wet face to mine. "Not as I love you," she whispered. "Never as I love you." Her lips brushed my cheek, and then, seeking my mouth, kissed me again and again with a sweetness and fire beyond belief. The wildness of it, and the wonder I shall not forget. No, not as long as I live. It was a sound in the doorway that made us look up. Our Poirot was standing there looking at us. I did not hesitate. With a bound I reached him and pinioned his arms to his sides. "Quick," I said to the girl. "Get out of here, as fast as you can." Hold him, with one look at me, she fled out of the room past us. I held Poirot in a grip of iron. Mon Ami observed the latter mildly. "You do this sort of thing very well. The strong man holds me in his grasp, and I am helpless as a child, but all this is uncomfortable and slightly ridiculous. Let us sit down and be calm. You won't pursue her?" "Mon Dieu! No, my Gerard, release me." My friend, keeping a suspicious eye upon him, for I paid Poirot the compliment of knowing that I was no match for him in astuteness, I relaxed my grip, and he sank into an arm-chair, feeling his arms tenderly. "It is that you have the strength of a bull when you are roused, Hastings. Bien, and do you think you have behaved well to your old friend? I show you the girl's photograph, and you recognize it, but you never say a word." "There was no need if you knew that I recognized it," I said rather bitterly. So Poirot had known all along. I had not deceived him for an instant. "Ta-ta! You did not know that I knew that. And tonight you helped the girl to escape when we have found her with so much trouble?"
Bien.
"It comes to this. Are you going to work with me or against me, Hastings?" For a moment or two I did not answer. To break with my old friend gave me great pain. Yet I must definitely range myself against him. Would he ever forgive me, I wondered. He had been strangely calm so far, but I knew him to possess marvelous self-command. "Poirot," I said, "I'm sorry. I admit I've behaved badly to you over this. But sometimes one has no choice, and in future I must take my own line." Poirot nodded his head several times. "I understand," he said. The mocking light had quite died out of his eyes, and he spoke with a sincerity and kindness that surprised me. "It is that, my friend, is it not? It is love that has come, not as you imagined it, all cock-a-hoop with fine feathers, but sadly with bleeding feet. Well, I warned you. When I realized that this girl must have taken the dagger, I warned you. Perhaps you remember, but already it was too late. But, tell me, how much do you know?" I met his eyes squarely. "Nothing that you could tell me would be any surprise to me, Poirot. Understand that. But in case you think of resuming your search for Miss Duveen, I should like you to know one thing clearly. If you have any idea that she was concerned in the crime, or was the mysterious lady who called upon Mr. Reynolds that night, you are wrong. I travelled home from France with that day, and parted from her at Victoria that evening, so that it is clearly impossible for her to have been in Merlinville." Poirot looked at me thoughtfully. "And you would swear to that in a court of law?" "Most certainly I would." Poirot rose and bowed.
Mon ami, vive la mort.
"It can perform miracles. It is decidedly ingenious what you have thought of there. It defeats even Hercule Poirot."